We're joined today by Eugene DePasquale, Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania's Attorney General. Why are you seeking this office?
First of all, thank you for having me. I always appreciate coming into PCN, so really appreciate the opportunity. I believe my background for 8 years as being the state's lead investigator. My investigation found over 3,000 untested rape kits, clearing that backlog and getting a lot of bad people off the street. My investigation on finding 58,000 unanswered phone calls, the child abuse hotline. My investigations led to cleaner air, cleaner water, protecting consumers and lowering prescription drug prices. And as the Philadelphia Inquirer said when they endorsed me in the primary, particularly in these partisan polarized times, we need a chief prosecutor who isn't a partisan warrior. So for all that reasons, I'm running to be the state's attorney general.
Now, you talked about just a moment ago your prior role as state auditor general. Right. You also served as state representative. Can you talk a little bit more about how that experience could translate into this new position?
So from the policy side of it, that was, as a legislator, I served on the Judiciary Committee, served with actually then state legislator, now Governor Shapiro, when we were both on there. And a lot of that was, protecting consumers, making sure everyone had a fair shake. Also in certain areas where if you felt the laws needed strengthening to further punish people that were doing harm to Pennsylvanians, we're doing that type of work as well. As Auditor General, it was a much different role. It was, there was certainly policy involved, but there it was being the independent watchdog, conducting tough investigations, whether it's cracking down on corruption, whether it be in certain school districts, whether it be in Scranton or Penn Hills, protecting taxpayers, protecting consumers, protecting clean air and clean water, and certainly my public safety investigations that led to getting particularly rapists off the street.
The Associated Press had reported that you never served as a prosecutor or a trial lawyer. Do you see that as an impediment in any way to serving as Attorney General?
Yeah, I have a very similar background to Governor Shapiro when he served in this role. We actually both served, like I said, on the Judiciary Committee, and he served as Montgomery County Commissioner. I actually have statewide experience when it comes to running a complicated state agency. So I've been an attorney for over 2 decades. But when it comes to being the Attorney General, I know how to conduct tough investigations, and I have broad experience in a whole slew of laws, whether it be environmental, criminal, consumer, the list goes on and on. I view this office as someone that's about to protect the public in not just one area, but in several areas.
You've previously spoken pretty candidly about your father's experiences, particularly with incarceration and addiction. How would that experience influence you if you held this new office?
Well, so for those that don't know, because there's probably some people that are, maybe hearing this for the first time, others not, but my dad was wounded in Vietnam, shot twice in the right leg, once in the left. And that eventually led to, whether, from the military hospital on, an addiction to painkillers that led to other stuff, eventually dealing, and a 10.5-year federal prison sentence. Now, I want to be clear, he certainly did wrong there, and some punishment was appropriate. But it also let me know that we're not taking care of our vets when they come back from war, at least not the way we should. And also that the war on drugs that was declared by former President Nixon in the 70s has probably been the most failed war in the history of the United States. It's actually worse now than it was then. So we've got to turn this war on drugs into a battle against addiction. When I was Auditor General, I investigated all of our drug rehabilitation programs to find out what works and what doesn't. We now have a historic opioid settlement. I want to use that experience to drive those dollars into the programs that work and make sure we're not wasting money on the programs that don't work so that we can actually put a dent in addiction.
What specific programs do you see as being successful against opioid addiction?
When it comes to people that have an addiction and they're in a treatment facility, if they are in for 28 days or less, the data I've seen and the data my investigation showed is that is just not effective. It's not enough time. It may feel good to get someone in there. And again, I want people, and if 28 days worked, it'd be ecstatic. But my evidence shows that it does not work. We got to have people in facilities for at least 90 days, if not more. So if we're going to make these investments, which we should actually be investing in programs that work.
If you were elected Attorney General, what would your top priority be?
Well, the first thing we have to do is make sure our democracy is safe and secure, and making sure that whoever the voters picked is the one that actually is declared the winner, at least in Pennsylvania. Other states are going to make their choices as well. And so there will be obviously a host of lawsuits. I will have to be dealing with those, if I'm elected, immediately after the election, working in the transition to make sure that the voters' will is what is upheld. Beyond that, reproductive freedom, because we certainly know that is under threat with Project 2025 happening all, at least as far as the Republican platform goes. I'm not saying every Republican is for that, but as far as the national Republicans in this Project 2025, and then beyond that, we have to make sure that we are cracking down on violent crime, protecting consumers, and making sure that we're protecting our seniors and children. Those are all items that I have previous experience in.
Since you referenced Project 2025, for someone that may not be familiar with it, could you just talk briefly about what it is and what specific provisions of it concern you the most? Yeah,
it's basically a 900-page manifesto put together by, think tank DC conservatives, which a lot of them are involved in the Trump campaign. Now, whether you believe Trump is for all of that or not, we'll leave that aside. It is still a 900-page manifesto that a lot of DC Republicans believe in, and a lot of that goes into, for starters, reproductive freedom. They want to actually have the ability, if there is a pregnant woman that is leaving a state that does not allow an abortion and comes to Pennsylvania, for example, they want the ability to come track that woman down, get her private health care data, report miscarriages, report other private health care information, and try to stop her from exercising her right to reproductive freedom in Pennsylvania. I want to make it clear, because I've had experience with this both personally and beyond, that if somebody is, not only for every Pennsylvanian, but for anyone traveling from one of those extremist states, when I say extremists, I'm not talking about the people there, I'm talking about their elected leaders. Anyone that comes here from one of those extremist states, I'll protect their right to reproductive freedom as well.
Why has the issue of women's reproductive rights been important to you?
Well, it's somewhat personal, but, and look, beyond just I've always been pro-choice, but post-Dobbs, Tracy and I just decided we had to begin talking about this. And that is, we have a son, Ben, who's 24, daughter, Sarah, who's 21. She's a senior at Temple. Ben is at graduate school at Georgetown. But before we had Ben, who's our oldest, we had an ectopic pregnancy at week 10. Now, we wanted to have kids. We ended up having kids, but that was at week 10. And an ectopic pregnancy is technically an abortion. For anyone that doesn't understand that the fetus has no chance of survival, but still, because of the procedure, it's technically an abortion. And it was at week 10. If we did that same procedure today in Florida, Texas, I think it's Idaho, Utah, and Oklahoma, that would be a crime. That could have led to the death of Tracy at the worst, and at the minimum, the potential of us not being able to have kids. That to me is just insane. And there are actually states where they are forbidding that procedure.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about gun violence. The issue of gun violence and some of the votes you made as a state house member were criticized and brought up during the primary. Could you just clearly give your view on gun violence and where you stand on things like red flag laws, that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I believe there should be universal background checks. I think that should include mental health checks. So I think we should make sure that people that aren't violent criminals are having access to weapons. I also, when it comes to firearms, as Attorney General, cracking down on ghost guns, prosecuting not just the people that commit the act, but anyone that illegally sells the gun. And when it comes to my votes in the State House, I voted in favor of a law, which one of the ones that included that if you had 3 guns stolen from you, that we could then prosecute that case, because anytime you've had 3 guns stolen and you're not reporting it to the authorities, we now know you're running an illegal gun trade. So I voted in favor of all of those. The one specifically you're asking about that I was criticized in the primary, and that is, I've always believed that you have a duty or you have a right to protect yourself in your own home. Out in the street in public, that is a different story, and I have voted against measures there. But when it comes to in your own home, I believe people have the right to protect themselves, and that's one of the ones I've received criticism for.
Beyond what we just discussed regarding guns, what would you do to address violent crime?
So as Attorney General, first of all, we've got to be smart about it. I think being the Attorney General, also making the case, we've got to invest in public education. We've got to, have smart crime prevention strategies that I think can certainly help put a dent in crime. Second thing is we do have to be tough on people that harm other individuals, whether that be through firearms or other forms of violence. It simply can't be tolerated that someone's harming another human being. So I'll be as tough as anybody when it comes to violent crime. And then when it comes to guns, we've got to make sure that we're not just prosecuting the person that pulls the trigger, but anyone that sells that firearm illegally, or anyone that is liable, for that someone illegally having access to that gun. I will make sure that we punish those individuals as well. We cannot just punish the person that pulls the trigger. If someone gives them that gun illegally or didn't do enough to secure that gun away, that person has to be punished as well.
Over the summer, the state Commonwealth Court had upheld a law that allows for the Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor that would have jurisdiction over crimes that were committed in SEPTA, the Philadelphia Region Public Transit Authority.
Yeah.
If you were elected, would you appoint this special prosecutor for this purpose? That
law does expire in 2026, so I believe the prosecutor that's in place now, my goal in that law, I want to be clear. First of all, people on SEPTA have a right to be safe. And as Attorney General, I will work with the district attorney, the mayor of Philadelphia, and the surrounding communities, making sure that they have the tools from my office to make sure people are safe. Now, when it comes to that act, look, there's strengths and weaknesses to it, but I want to make sure I'm working with the district attorneys of the whole region, making sure that the laws are enforced and that anyone that commits a bad act on SEPTA is held fully accountable.
You've spoken about having a brother who had health challenges and your family didn't have health care as a result of that. How has that influenced your views on health care?
So, again, some people may be tuning in for the first time, not tuning into your show. I'm sure everyone tunes in a lot, but maybe tuning in to see me. And that is my brother, Anthony, had muscular dystrophy. So I had two younger brothers, Vincent, who's a year younger than me. Anthony was 7 years younger. And in December of 1998, he passed away from complications with muscular dystrophy as a sophomore at the University of Pittsburgh. Look, that was before the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was before the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, so we were not able to have health insurance because he had a pre-existing condition. So that really taught me from a very early age, A, we have to protect people that sometimes are more vulnerable. We have to look out. We have to be our brother's keeper in many instances. And I think we've come a long way on helping people that have these physical challenges and mental challenges too. But one of the things that is a threat under Project 2025, coming back to then, is that they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Now, I've been waiting with bated breath from Donald Trump from when he first started running to actually announce what his health care plan is beyond repealing the Affordable Care Act. Because if you repeal it without anything else to replace it, that means protections for people with pre-existing conditions goes away. I will fight against that with everything I have because I know the consequences to families of what happened when you don't have those protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And beyond that, I also know when powerful interests, whether they be, insurance behemoths or giant corporations, what they can do to people if someone doesn't have their back. And as Attorney General, I will have the back of the people of this state.
Can you talk a little bit more about healthcare and particularly what you find problematic in the system, whether it's price gouging, deceptive practices, whatever, and how you would like to address those?
So there's two areas specifically I think need to be addressed. Number one is we have a real issue when it comes to women of color and maternal care. They are dying at a much higher rate than people that are mostly white women. Now, I do not believe doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals go to work with the idea of having more women of color die. I don't believe that. But the stats and the numbers are what they are, which is it's so strikingly bad that there's something wrong here. And as Attorney General, I want to work with our healthcare professionals to figure out what is going wrong, work with our hospitals, what is going wrong, and where appropriate, fix it, because it's simply unacceptable that in the United States of America and in Pennsylvania, where we have some of the best hospitals in the world, that women of color during pregnancy die at much higher rates. So that's one. Secondly, and if you live in an urban area, you may not be as familiar with this, but we are losing access to rural health care all over Pennsylvania. It's unacceptable. Now, as Attorney General, I'll have the ability to block one or a giant healthcare agency or corporation or nonprofit from having too much market dominance in one region. I will aggressively use that. Beyond that, the legislature is considering giving the Attorney General power to block hospital mergers. That is something I strongly believe that the Attorney General should have that tool because, again, I think a lot of this is driven from, it's about the numbers. These health giants want to just make more money. And because of that, people that are low income and in rural, more sparsely populated areas, they are losing access to health care, which is dangerous for the people of Pennsylvania.
As State Auditor General, you had talked about anticipated missed revenue from not legalizing taxing marijuana. Do you think that sends a mixed message in any way with the Attorney General's role of enforcing against the illegal drug trade?
No, I mean, we can be, pinpoint on this, which is cocaine, heroin, horrible, fentanyl, horrible, and be very strict and tough on that, understanding that marijuana is not in those categories. The science has moved on. It is not a gateway drug to other areas. I'm not here telling you that everybody should go do it, but the idea that it's still illegal is borderline ridiculous. Other states around us have passed this. Let's focus on where real crime is, which is violent drug trade and violent crime and gun violence. Let's focus on that and not on whether someone on a Friday night smokes a marijuana cigarette.
You've said if elected, you'd prosecute hate crimes against members of the LGBTQ community. What specific policies would you support to protect this community and to promote equality in the state?
Well, one that is not a law now that I think should be a law, and that is workplace protection for the LGBTQ community. So Pennsylvania is a state that still does not have, it's not passed the House of Representatives, should be passed by the Senate, should be signed into law by the governor. Beyond that, I'm going to work with school districts all over the state, school boards and school superintendents to make sure that there is going to be zero tolerance for bullying in our schools, whether someone is LGBTQ or not. I'm going to make sure that standing up to bullies is a platform that we're simply not going to allow our kids to get pushed around if they're, no matter who they are, but particularly if they are more vulnerable. And I'll make sure that I'll have the back of those kids so they can learn in a healthy environment.
On your website, you talk about student debt and student loans. What would you do as Attorney General to help hold those debt companies accountable? Well,
for starters, I think it should be good to concede now that I still have student debt of my own from law school. So this can be crippling stuff for people. Now, my interest rates aren't nearly as bad as what you're seeing today, but we should make sure that you are not getting price gouged simply by trying to achieve the American dream. For a lot of students, if they want to go to med school or law school or be a dentist, be a healthcare professional, you're going to need that advanced schooling. And for people, loans may be the only viable way to get there, but it may limit your ability to have a career in what you may want to do because the rates are so high that you can't afford to help do public interest healthcare or public interest law. We've got to make sure that it's a fair shake. Look, it's one thing, look, I get these companies are going to make a little bit of money, but price gouging is unacceptable, and I'll make sure I hold the line on that and protect the students.
What is the Attorney General's role in protecting the environment?
The Pennsylvania Constitution is very clear on this. You have a state constitutional right to clean air and pure water. So any entity that is polluting your air or polluting your water gets to be held accountable by the Department of Environmental Protection and the Pennsylvania Attorney General.
In April, an article in the Pittsburgh News, you talk about the First Amendment rights and specifically about book bans. What would you do as Attorney General to fight against book bans?
I get to enforce all aspects of the Constitution, and one of that is the First Amendment. The government should not be telling people what to read. I respect parents and families weighing in on what they want their children to be able to read. That's a whole different story. That is families making a decision. But the government, and particularly some of these, I would say extremist school board members running on a platform of trying to ban books. I want kids to read. Now, again, if a family member says they don't want to, that's a whole different discussion. And I respect parents and family members weighing in on that. But the government should not be making that decision. And as Attorney General, I will protect free speech.
What has been the main message of your campaign?
I'm going to be an independent fighter. I'm going to enforce the laws. I'll protect Pennsylvanians, whether it's cracking down on violent crime, whether it's making sure we're protecting people from the illegal drug trade, but also protecting consumers from price gouging, these crooks trying to scam our seniors every single day. And I've got a background that shows I've done it. I've done investigations that have led to a cleaner environment, safer nursing homes. I've cracked down on consumer fraud, and also I've made sure that the community is safer by making sure our children are safer and protected victims from sexual assault by cracking down on these untested rape kits, making sure we're getting some of these creeps off the street.
How have you gone about campaigning and getting your message out?
Well, some of it is this. You get to do as many interviews as possible, and you get to have sort of these formats. Sometimes it's podcasts, and of course the television campaigns will be starting soon.
You've received endorsements from a variety of labor entities, Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia Inquirer. What are the values of these endorsements? I
think they know where I stand. I mean, they've seen me in action now for some time, whether it be as Auditor General or state legislator. And I think I always get a kick out of the person that says, I don't always agree with you yet, but I know where you stand. And when you fight hard for what you believe in. I always take those as enormous compliments.
What are the main issues that you hear from voters?
A lot of reproductive freedom happens. In the primary, there was more on protecting democracy. I'm not saying that people don't care about that, but still a lot of reproductive freedom. Certainly people want to make sure that they have safety in their communities, and the environment and consumer fraud are big issues. I think every day the Attorney General's office gets boatloads of calls on consumer fraud.
We've already talked a little bit about your past experiences. You've run for state representative, you've run for Auditor General, and for Congress as well. What have you learned from these campaigns that you're taking with you this time around? Well,
I've learned that never underestimate the former president, meaning President Trump. He, for all his faults, he has a constituency, and so he should not be underestimated, and that is always a factor in these presidential elections. So from that, I need to talk to everybody. Not just people on the left, not just people in the center, but also people on the right. I believe that I'll be an attorney general for everybody, and I'm going to talk to everybody and hopefully earn their trust and their vote on Election Day.
What prompted you to work in public service?
Now, I will tell you that when the pay raise happened, I felt Harrisburg needed to shake up. And so I ran for the legislature, knocked on a lot of doors, and ended up winning. And it was also during the Iraq War, and there was two things I talked about. That was reforming Harrisburg and alternative energy, and I was successful in both of those roles. I became the first legislator to post my expenses online. That earned me some ire inside the Capitol dome, but the public certainly appreciated it. Helped rewrite the state's open record law. Helped make sure that the legislature was more open and accountable to the people of the state, but also passed the largest alternative energy bill in Pennsylvania history during my first term, and further actions led to banning texting while driving, which is probably the thing I was most actually known for as a legislator.
What accomplishments are you most proud of?
Well, finding the untested rape kits and the child protection work. Those were two that they are going to have a lot of impact in protecting people well after I'm out of public life. Very proud of that, and to help my team played in that. It was not a one-person team, which again plays into why I know I can be a good attorney general, and that is I know how to put together a talented, diversified staff that knows how to represent Pennsylvania and knows how to protect the public in every section of this state.
How do you differentiate yourself from your opponent?
I'm someone that has a broad experience in the law, whether it be protecting consumers, protecting the public from violent crime, cracking down on rapists, but also protecting consumers, and a record that shows for it. When my investigations into our nursing home industry directly led to a greater nurse-to-patient ratio in those facilities. That's something I've done. I have a record that actually backs up. My investigation into the untested rape kits led to hundreds of arrests, getting bad people off the street. My investigation into pharmacy benefit managers directly led to reforms in that law to make sure consumers had lower drug prices, and also these crisis pregnancy centers, which I believe are out here committing frauds against pregnant women all the time. My investigations into that led directly to Governor Shapiro canceling that contract so that you couldn't basically try to scam pregnant women in Pennsylvania.
Why would you like voters to elect you as state attorney general?
If you want someone who's going to be tough and fair to everybody, no matter what, who's going to protect you, no matter what the issue is, whether it's on crime, consumer, the environment, or reproductive freedom, and someone that has done the job, who will tell you what I believe, and also will work hard to make sure that when I leave office as 8 years, the state will be better off for having me serving as your attorney general.
Eugene DePasquale is the Democrat running for state attorney general. Thank you for joining us.
Francine, thanks for having me.